and welcome to another recording of the Content Marketing Studio. We're back for another season to help you create better online content faster. I am your host, Pascal Finton, and joining me to talk about how to write maybe your first book is my very good friend and guest, Clare Josa. You are a business mentor, speaker, and multiple book author, I would say.
Multiple, 8 now. 8 books. Yeah. I know I'm not publishing one this year, and it's like, feels really weird.
No, I'm sure. So let me start with two important questions at this moment in time. Where are you and how are you doing at this moment?
Where am I? I split my time between Sussex and Salisbury, depending whether or not schools are open. And right now I'm in Sussex on my little farm in Ashdown Forest, Winnie the Pooh country. And how am I doing? Do you know what? I'm still sane, which feels like a real achievement at this point of the year, particularly having homeschooled the kids for 6 months. So kudos to everybody out there who's had to do that. And yeah, actually, I'm expanding and thriving. It's really helped me to take out the stuff from my business that was no longer a good fit and to really focus on the stuff that I'm passionate about.
Yeah. So let me remind our viewers and listeners that Clare, you are the Director of Education and Trainer at Beyond Alchemy Limited. You're also the co-founder of EUVAT Action Campaign, because of course, you know, what not to go for an easy life. You're also the host of the Soul-Led Leaders podcast series.
Right.
And as we mentioned a moment, you're the author of the Ditching Imposter Syndrome, which will be at the heart of our conversation. But you are also a reformed engineer.
Yeah.
What is that?
So I studied mechanical engineering in German at uni, and I've got a master's degree in it, specializing in diesel engine tribology, as you do. And I was one of the first people in Europe to train in what's called Six Sigma and lean manufacturing. So that whole just-in-time stuff that we talked about a lot when Brexit was new news. So what I've done really is I've moved from there to being head of market research at Dyson, one of the most disruptive brands in the world. And then in 2003, I decided I really wanted to work with people, and I got qualified as an NLP trainer, and I set up my own leadership development company, which is what I've been running. I do leadership development both at a corporate level, but also for entrepreneurs, is how to do the business strategy, but combined with that deeper inside work, that means the business strategy actually gets you results. And that's what I've spent most of the last 20 years doing.
No, excellent. And you know, 2003 is also the year I kind of changed career path. So I was a marketing practitioner. And then one phone call in 2003, I changed completely to being a digital trainer and mentor. And so we almost had, you know, very parallel stories. So today, I want to talk to you about two things. I'd like our conversation to be a source of inspiration for somebody thinking of writing their first book, and maybe having to ditch the imposter syndrome, see what I've done there, but also for other book authors who are maybe onto their third, their fourth, their fifth, and how do you actually still find the drive, the energy, and avoid burnout in the process? So yeah, we're going to cover lots of things, but can I begin by asking you about writing and writing books? I mean, is this something that you've always enjoyed? Were you the kid in the back of the classroom that loved writing essays while somebody else was hating it?
I was till I was 15. And then my English teacher, who was an amazing, amazing woman, I think she just had a bad day, and I'd put in a probably really ropey essay. And she gave me a B, which for me was a disaster. And she wrote one little word that changed my life for 30 years, contrived, at the bottom of my story. And in that moment, I took on the belief, instead of, yeah, she's right, that was really pants, I took on the belief that I can't write a story. Okay, and for 30 years, I've just given my age away now. For 30 years, I kept holding on to that. I never even told a made-up story to my kids. I was so convinced I was rubbish at telling stories, and even rubbish at telling jokes. Yeah, we take this stuff to the extreme. So I had already published 5 books, and I still didn't feel like an author. Then, about 4 years ago, I did my work. It was like, okay, that's really holding me back. And I did my clearing work I do. Didn't feel any different. A few days later, I drafted 4 novels. 4 months later, the first one had been written, edited in the shops, being reviewed as unputdownable. And for me, it was writing the novels that unblocked the writing process for me. Because although I love my previous books, writing those 2 novels taught me so much more about writing. And I just felt so in the moment. And I wrote both of them over a summer, 2 different summers. And it was about that being up before the family was out of bed in the summer, sitting in my kitchen with my laptop, pouring these ideas and realizing that I didn't know which words were going to come next. I would have sudden twists would appear in the stories that I didn't consciously think about. Then when I wrote Ditching Imposter Syndrome, I put that same energy into the book. And people tell me it feels like reading a novel. It feels like it's unputdownable. I used the same novel and storytelling techniques in Ditching Imposter Syndrome to take something that could have been really dry and make it much more human and personable. And for me, when I'm writing and I'm writing a book, I have to clear everything else out of my schedule.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have to do half the amount of normal work. It's a big commitment, but it has to be a journey. The whole kind of write a book in a weekend and hope it's going to be a bestseller, it really won't be. Yeah. So I adore writing. Haven't been able to do much of it this year because I found with lockdown and homeschooling the kids and everything else, I barely know what day of the week it is, let alone being able to hold a plot line. But I'm hoping so much to get back to it next summer.
All right. Well, we're going to go, with the flow with this conversation, and I'm going
Yeah.
to pick on the couple of things you've said. So, can we go back to? Are you saying that there was real merit in you moving into creating essentially a work of fiction to
Mm.
then be able to create a work that was essentially for the world of business?
There was for me as a writer. I found that my writing style is completely different because gone are the days where people want dry business books. Yeah. Gone are the days where they want the kind of the white papers expanded. And what they actually want is to be able to connect with you as an author and to feel like you're reading their mind. So one of the most important things I did for Ditching Imposter Syndrome, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this session, Pascal, is the research I did. So I get feedback from readers saying, you're in my head. How did you know? Yeah. And the answer is, I asked people. So yeah, I've found that that has helped me to relax in my writing style. So you don't have to write novels, but that's what it took for me to stop thinking of myself as somebody who was trying to communicate information to becoming somebody who was writing this book so it would be an experience for my readers that would change their lives, whether or not they implemented the strategies I was teaching.
Right. All right. Right. So essentially, what you are asking us, for aspiring book authors or for
Mm,
regular authors, a reminder we're here to craft an experience, not
yes,
showcase how much we know.
exactly that, exactly that. And I employed so many of the novel writing techniques in Ditching Imposter Syndrome, like literally leaving a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter to make somebody hungry to keep going. Because when we're writing nonfiction books, over 90% of nonfiction books get started and never finished. And so I saw my job as making sure as many people as possible would finish my book so that they gained the full benefit. Because if they don't read it, then actually what happens is they feel guilty. And because we're all human, they project that feeling of guilt onto the author and they blame us. Yeah. So instead of the book deepening the relationship, it actually damages the relationship. So using those stylistic things from novels, those concepts and strategies allowed me to create a book that covers pretty heavy topic material in a way that feels safe and guided and unputdownable. There are a number of people who've told me they've read Ditching Imposter Syndrome in a weekend and they just couldn't stop reading.
Can you give us, and I know it's going to be perhaps an unfair request, but you mentioned the term storytelling. So I'm all
Mm.
over this, right? So what is it that you kind of remembered or took away from your work on the novels that qualify as storytelling that you can use for,
Okay.
your work with now?
So this one's it's really obvious when we know it, but it's not something you would intuitively do. So I don't share client case studies in my books, for example, not even hybrid and made up, nor most of the time, because I never want a client of mine to think, oh gosh, am I going to end up in one of Claire's books? Yeah. So I tend to tell stories about my past because then I can choose what to share. And I will highlight examples that prove my point. So what I do as an NLP trainer, you do a lot of what's called pre-teaching. So that by the time you teach a concept, somebody's actually already become familiar with it, maybe through an experience or a story. So that's what I used my stories for, was to provide examples of something I was about to teach that maybe the conscious mind would have resisted. And the way I invoked the storytelling from the novels was things like chopping and changing sentence length. Yeah. And going back into the emotions and the physical sensations of the memory. so that people actually went on an emotional journey with me during those case studies, so that what they were doing was actually mental rehearsal for the change they were about to make in their lives by reading the story that I was telling them in the middle of the book.
When you talk about emotions and physical sensations,
Mm.
that almost feels like a tall order, doesn't it? Are you?
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's centuries of examples of how this has worked through playwrights, through movies, of
Mm.
course, and so on and so forth. So it makes sense that if you want to become a book author or are,
Mm.
that you are the custodian of those sensations. Do you
Exactly.
have a checklist? I mean, or does it come to you naturally now to do so?
It comes to me naturally now. When I was writing the novels, I would deliberately go through each scene. So I do what's called the vomit draft in the industry, which is you just blah, get the book on paper or onto your computer, and then you start the editing. You never edit as you go through. And when I did that first edit with each of the scenes where I wanted an emotion, I would test myself to see if it changed my breathing, because that's the biggest clue. If something's exciting, it shifts how you breathe. If something is fearful, it shifts how you breathe. And I wanted to check that it was having that effect on me here. So I just did the same then with Ditching Imposter Syndrome. And I actually made the decision to open the book with a story. So the book opens with the moment that I sat there in my engineering career talking to the only other female engineer in my factory. We were upstairs in a part of the old factory that was closed down with our cups of tea burning our fingers. And as we walked along, and I couldn't even look her in the eye, we were side by side. I felt my heart racing. I knew I had to ask her the question. I could feel that that tension was building. And I said to her, "Do you ever feel like they're going to find you out and realize you're not good enough?" And I just felt my heart stop while I waited for her to reply. And she whispered, "You too?" So you just start the book with a story like that. Yeah. And it's not the perfect example of how to evoke an emotion, but that's so much more potent. The number of people who tell me they read that story and go, "This book's for me." And it's also brilliant because it puts off anybody who wants an academic tome who will hate my book. It means they don't even bother buying it.
Yes, you're right. So, in a way, the audience will find you or find itself, and within the first chapter or page, go, not for me, or yes, it is for me. And I think that's
Exactly.
also what we need to become more and more comfortable as content creators, which is at the heart of the Content Marketing Studio series, which is you cannot please everybody. In fact, in trying to impress everyone, you will, essentially attract no one.
Exactly, exactly. And the other thing I've done with the book is I've balanced out the stories with my research. So I wanted to make sure I had the latest data in the book, because I read every book I could find on imposter syndrome before I wrote this, because I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was different and unique, and also to see whether actually there was even a need for the book. If there was a brilliant one out there already, it would be okay, I'll just promote that one. And I realized that none of them were actually grounded in any kind of research. And back when I decided to write it, which was the very end of 2018, I started looking for the latest research, particularly in the UK, on imposter syndrome, and there was none. There's never been a large scale research study done, only kind of telephone polls or small scale university studies. So I sat there, former head of market research, former master's degree in research, and said, okay, I'll run a research study then. And so actually the first part of writing the book was running a full academic 2,000 person with qualitative interviews, research studies to find out, what is imposter syndrome? How do people experience it? How can we tell the difference between it and self-doubt? What kind of behaviors does it trigger? What have people tried that works? What has actually made it worse? So this is woven through the book, and the feedback I get is having that research data. And it doesn't have to be your own study. It's just, I didn't have another one to choose from. Having that research gives the book the gravitas. That means that the conscious mind, the bits like, yeah, who says, is presented with that information so it can step back and let the unconscious mind experience the journey and the change work.
Mm. You remind me of a saying that I kind of made up on the spot almost. I was saying to people, where you talk about obviously content and how it's meant to engage all sensations, but I
Mm-hmm.
think over time, and I wonder where that's come from. It must be some weird hybrid of the need for marketing people to always impress and coerce others to do something they don't want to do, but also the need to keep it tight because of print cost. But I
Yeah.
think with the world of online now, we don't have to worry. But I think the way in which people write things have been so matter of fact. And I said, you can't just have the data, you have to have the drama. And I
Yeah.
think, that's very, very important. So what happened? What happened late 2018 for you to make the decision to write that book then?
I got my backside kicked. So I've specialized in imposter syndrome for 17 years. My very first executive mentoring client had it. Back then, I didn't even know it had a name. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And I started to develop strategies that worked. And I realized that everybody else out there was teaching coping strategies. And when I talk about imposter syndrome, I describe it as the gap between who you see yourself as being and who you think you need to be to achieve something. And the more important the thing you want to achieve is, the deeper that ravine looks. And we build what I call the bridge of coping strategies over this ravine. And we push on through and we force ourselves to cross that bridge of coping strategies, terrified of looking down. And instead, what I've been teaching people to do is to shift who they see themselves as being, or to allow themselves to clear out the blocks to become that version of them. So the ravine disappears. There is no need for a bridge of coping strategies. And the fear simply doesn't need to present. And I realized my fellow masterminders and my clients, they knew that I had this stuff. And they basically gave me an absolute talking to, saying, are you going to just get on and publish the book? And November or so that year, I went, okay, I will. Having no idea it was going to be this big a project, but it has completely transformed my business because it's a book that works. Yeah. When we've got the whole, let's write it in a weekend, there are some subjects that can be done like that, but where you need to take the reader on a journey and you need to actually craft what are the steps they need to take so that this works even when I'm not there. I call getting a book pajama ready. Okay. It's about taking the skills that you have and getting it ready so that somebody can read it in their pajamas, in bed, late at night, half asleep, and it will still work for them. That process takes time. It takes testing. It means that what you teach in the book might be quite different from what you do when you've got people in a room with you or on Zoom with you. And that getting it pajama ready is really about crafting the journey from where do I want my reader to be at the beginning and where do I want them to be at the end. And this is another thing that was a really tough decision, is what are those points going to be? Like when you write a novel, you choose where to start and you choose where to finish. You don't sit there and say, and on Monday morning, Sophie was born. You just start at a choice point in Sophie's life and you choose where to stop telling the story. It's the same with nonfiction. Which point in life do I want my reader to be at when they start reading this book? And where do I want to get them to by the end?
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Can I go into, what you had to go through to write it? So what did you put it around you? What environment did you create? Did you send everything away for 6 months so you could be left alone? Did you, what happened? And did you have a wall for the post-it notes? How did you make it work for you?
So the way I'm a very kinesthetic thinker, I don't tend to think visually. So mind maps don't work for me, but post-its do. Yeah, and I'm currently planning a conference, which I know you're aware of. Let's Rock 2021, and my whiteboard is covered in post-its of me helping to organize my thoughts. So I do exactly the same. I make the decision on what's the start point, what's the end point. Then I literally dump onto post-its everything I could possibly say about the topic. And I allow myself about 2 days to do that. And then I go through and I say, okay, I do something that I call walking the plank. So I reverse engineer. If I want them to finish reading the book and be at this point or have had this experience and they started here, what do they need to have known at this point? What do they need to have experienced at that point? I actually map out their journey. And then I go through the post-its, and anything that doesn't add to that journey, that might be a side shoot or a distraction, I put in my maybe pile because I'm really hard at throwing away ideas. I really struggle with it. Yeah. So it's my maybe pile. But basically, for one of those concepts or strategies to get into the book, it's going to have to really earn its place. Then I'm left with the bits that I think actually that really is essential. I put them in order. That's how I've worked out, okay, these are the key steps, the key sections of the book. I look at what order, okay, this one goes in section 1. Okay, now let's put section 1 in order. And I end up with post-its on the floor. So I have to lock my dogs away somewhere, otherwise they would help with the process. I end up with a row of columns. And that is literally the structure of my book. I'll then revisit the maybes. And if any of them I think actually really that might be worth going in, I'll put it in there, but with a big maybe. And my key is to make the journey as concise as possible whilst including everything they need, because anything extra is a distraction and can take them off the path and they won't come back, or it could confuse them. Then I put all of that into Scrivener, and I have my chapters, my main sections. I go through and say, right, these are the 3 things I need to make sure I've covered in this. And then I literally just start writing.
And do you come up with the titles of the chapters as a guideline, or you just say chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you deal with that later?
It depends on some of the chapters you look at, it's like, it's got to be called that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And others, it will be chapter 1, chapter 2. And because what does this chapter need to be called? That's part of my teasing them through the book. So I always make sure that the headings in the table of contents are curious, that they invoke curiosity. So for example, one of the sections in Ditching Imposter Syndrome is Honey, I Shrunk the Mountains. Yeah. And it's that kind of thing. I know exactly what's in that, but it's the kind of thing that my dream reader, they're going to read that and go, I want to know what's in there. Yeah. Because my dream reader will remember Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And it's that kind of thing. It's having teasers as my chapter headlines, having that in the table of contents, because most people will have a look at that on Amazon online or in a bookstore, that invokes the curiosity and also helps them realize this is not going to be a boring book.
Does it help you as well? Because I use that trick for my training courses and my programs, where I come up with a very evocative title for my own benefit too.
Yeah, it definitely can help me. And the most important thing for me is that laser focus. And I will normally start at the beginning and write, unless, some mornings I might wake up and think, I've got to do that bit because I'm on fire about that right now. And then I find exactly the same thing happen with Ditching Imposter Syndrome as happened in my first 2 novels, is there'll be the odd chapter that you think, oh, I'm resisting writing that one. Is it because it's a bit tricky and I need to clear something out to allow it to flow? Or is it that it's not needed? And 9 times out of 10, I've discovered those are the bits that actually aren't needed. And even if I've got a couple of thousand great words in there and I'm just resisting finishing it, it has to go. And what I've been doing, because I really hate throwing great words away,
I was going to ask.
Is that becomes part of the bonuses. Yeah, it might become a deep dive article. It might go in the Readers Club. With the novels, I actually had what we call deleted scenes. Yeah. So where my editor went through in my first novel and she's like, you just don't need that whole scene. I'm like, but I love it. It's my baby. So I just had deleted scenes and gave them to people when they signed up for the Readers Club.
I love that. I mean, further using deleted scenes for me as a filmmaker, I just love it. But,
exactly.
Yeah. Of course, there's always a bonus, stuff in your director's cut. So, you got all that. Yeah. Excellent. So when you write, I mean, do you literally just write as it comes and then you worry later on about punctuation, grammar, and storytelling, or do you try and get it right first time?
I do the storytelling as I go through. And sometimes, for example, if I know that I want a case study or a story at a certain point and my brain's not in that space, if it's in the analytical mode, I'll just do great big red font, put example here. Yeah. So I'll come back sometimes and do those when I'm in that more creative, innovative mode, imaginative mode. But yeah, I do it as I go through. My grammar and spelling is pretty okay. The spelling Scrivener tells me about as I go through, and typos and things. And when I studied engineering, one of the first courses they made us do was touch typing. And at the time I was like, this is just so weird, but it has saved me so many thousands of hours. So I'm able to type at close to the speed that I speak in my head, which makes it so much easier. So it just flows onto paper. And the only reason I would ever review a chapter before I've finished the book is if I'm sitting there and I've suddenly on chapter 7 thought, actually, I needed to cover this in chapter 2. Yeah. So I forced myself to do that vomit draft, to get it all out. And then I go back with the first draft, edit that. At that point, I always send it to 2 or 3 people I know and love, and they have a read. They do the sense read. Does this actually make sense to me? Are there any bits where I want to stop reading? I'll do that bit next. Then it goes off to my editor, who works her magic.
Yes, because it is a team effort. Ultimately, you're doing, a big chunk of the work.
Yeah.
What is actually, just for clarification, what is the role of the editor, also from your perspective?
So I've worked with a range of editors over the last few years. My current editor, I just love her to bits. So the first thing she does is, as she's doing her speed read through it, she'll just annotate in the side on Word. So I write in Scrivener, but I export it to Word for her to then go and edit. She'll just write comments on the side like, oh my God, this bit really got me, or this bit turned me off a bit. So she's my running commentary, my sounding board, and she's really showing me, you need more on this, Claire, because I felt like you were in my head. Yeah. So that's also giving me the ideas for what I need to create for content to market the book. This is the stuff that really connects. So she'll do that first. She is brilliant at being that objective outside person saying, look, I know you love that bunch of words, but actually they either don't fit here or they don't fit at all. Yeah. And I don't have a copy editor. I don't have somebody come through and change my sentences. I just get it proofread because my writing style is my writing style. So I'm looking at structural edits. Does this flow? Is there a point where I put a gap in there that someone's got to jump over? Are there concepts in the book that people wouldn't understand if they didn't already understand my work? Because we're so close to it, we can't always assess that. So what she does is she takes out a lot of the waffle. She makes sure the structure and flow is there. Something when I studied in Germany, we call it der rote Faden, the red thread that guides you through the journey of the book. And she is my tough talker. Yeah, if there's a bit that she's like, this is not working in this bit, Claire, you need to go and fix these 3 things. She won't tell me what to do to fix it because that's my job. But she'll tell me these are the problems. The key for me with an editor, and as an editor I used to work with that I don't work with anymore, is they need to fill you at the end of their report. It needs to be fair and it needs to be tough, but it needs to fill you with hope instead of despair.
No, so you know, projected back to the classroom where your teacher gave you back your essay.
Exactly, because it's really personal having your book kind of taken apart. And one editor I worked with once came back with 32 pages of commentary on one of my books. And I read it and I didn't touch the book again for 3 months. And she went back to me saying, why isn't your book published yet? I was like, because I cried so much when I read your report. And she said, but your book was brilliant. I was like, the report didn't say that. So you need to look at the personality of your editor. Are they a glass half empty person? In which case you might not want to work with them. You want someone who will spot the warts and the problems, but they will explain them to you in a way that doesn't destroy your confidence and your hope and your creativity.
When obviously you were crafting the book, did you have the title in mind already, or you like to take the pleasure and keeping that to the end? Yeah.
So when I work with people on really crafting their book, as you say, it's a beautiful way of describing it. The first thing I say is one person, one problem, one book. Because the biggest mistake I see so many of us making is trying to share everything we know in one book and trying, as we've already discussed today, to have that book appeal to everybody. So the title is very intentional. I have a course called Nail Your Book Idea, which is exactly what I started the book with. What is the one compelling promise I'm going to make to people that they will have achieved by the end of the book? That is my subtitle. And my title for Ditching Imposter Syndrome, I wanted ditch because it's a strong word and I wanted to attract action takers. And I made it ditching because I wanted them to understand it's an ongoing process. You know, they're not going to read the first 10 pages and be free from it. They actually need to do something. And I deliberately, I ummed and erred for ages on the tagline because I wasn't clear on who my target audience was going to be. And actually, I changed the tagline, which meant part of the book needed to be rewritten. But I really wanted to appeal to people who wanted to step up and lead and make a big difference, whether that's in somebody else's business, in their own business, in a charity, in a campaign. So having that compelling promise clear, then set, right, where's this person's start point? Where's this person's end point? If I hadn't had those, I would have written a very different book.
Thank you very much. Can we just quickly close on the crafting of the book around publication and printing, and what decisions or options you went through until you decided to go for self-publishing? Am I right?
Yep. So I set up my own publishing company about 8 or 9 years ago now. Yeah. So the reason I set up my own publishing company, firstly, having my own publishing company, which is called an imprint, allows me to get into bookshops. which if I use Amazon, if it shows the Amazon, whatever, I can't remember what they call it now. It's no longer CreateSpace. They've got some lovely sounding thing. It's like their publishing brand name. If I use that, it's harder to get into bookshops and I don't have the credibility. So that bit was a no-brainer. You know, I know people who've written incredible books with publishers and they get 50p a copy. And that is just so insulting off a £15 book. Yeah, you can't fund even the subscriptions it takes to be an author and the software on that kind of revenue. So that was an absolute no-brainer. The other thing that I did, because I knew Ditching Imposter Syndrome was a book I wanted to wave around on stages and in interviews, I deliberately decided to do an initial print run of a hardback. And I did that with Dare to Dream Bigger as well, which is the book I wrote before the novels. And you can see how beautiful, shiny that is. Yeah, so you've got the gold and it's a lovely hardback and it's got that smell. It gives you a level of credibility if it's a book that you're actually going to be showing people at events, you know, in the olden days where we could get together. Yeah. So that one's got gold embossing on. The Ditching Imposter Syndrome's actually got UV spot on it, so you can stroke it and it is lovely. And when I go to conferences and I just put it on the table where I'm sitting, people will come and pick it up in a way that I don't see them doing with paperback print on demand books. So I like to do an initial print run. I have distribution set up so that automatically goes to bookshops and Amazon. I don't have to do that posting stuff myself, but it shows people you mean it. Yeah. It's more expensive now than it was before Brexit because paper prices and things have increased, but actually it's still cheaper than doing it through Amazon. And it's an investment up front and you have inventory to manage and you need the people to do that for you, but it sells me more copies. People talk about it. You know, when they get the book and they take photos and share it on social media, it looks so much more impressive. So if you're writing a book that you want to be a cornerstone book, you know, like on WordPress, it says, is this a cornerstone article sometimes when you're using Yoast for your SEO? If it's a cornerstone book and you think, actually, this is a book I'm going to commit to marketing for 5 years, yeah, then it's really worth starting it off with that print run, because the surprise and delight of the quality feeling that people have when they read it makes a huge difference to word of mouth. And I know so many people who've bought the Kindle version and then bought the hardbacks. They're like, I just want to hold this book.
You just mentioned, you know, marketing your book for 5 years. Do you mean that?
Yeah, I do. It's like having children. So it takes at least a year for a book to take off, unless you have an enormous platform or put a huge amount into advertising. It simply takes that long with interviews, with articles, with word of mouth. You know, I'm now at a stage where I get approached every week by the media for commentary on gender pay gap, on imposter syndrome, self-imposed glass ceilings. That has taken over a year of talking about mostly that one topic. Yeah. So if you're going to write a book and you want it to be a core part of your brand and a core part of growing your business, it needs to be a topic that you know that you're still going to be happy talking about in 5 years' time, that you won't have sat there and gone, oh gosh, do I have to talk about that old book again? It's another reason I self-published is, had I written this book and got somebody else to publish it, it would only have come out this summer, because the lag between you finishing the book and it being sold in stores is often up to a year. I knew that by that point, I wouldn't want to touch that book anymore. I'd have moved on to something else. So you've got to be prepared to make that long-term commitment. And 12 to 18 months for a book to start really selling itself is not an unrealistic time frame. I love it now when I look at my Amazon sales figures or my Clay sales figures from Gardeners, my distributor, and I see how many copies are selling and people sign up for my Reader's Vault, and I don't know any of them. And that excites me because people are selling this book to each other and creating that momentum behind a book. You can have a flashy launch. You can use all the tactics of like stick it down at 99p or free or bribe people to do reviews, and you can do whatever you want to do. But my old meditation master, I trained as a meditation teacher back in 2008. He used to say with meditation, when you're sitting there, it's like lighting a fire. You strike the match. And what most of us do is with our meditation or book launches, we strike the match, might strike 4 or 5 of them, chuck them on the fire and hope the fire will catch. And he said, what we actually have to do is strike that match, hold it under the tinder until the tinder catches, gently fan that flame until the kindling catches, and then give that fire what it needs so the wood catches, and then it starts to be self-sustaining. And it's the same with publishing and marketing a book. You need that initial strike and light, but you have to keep tending those flames so that the fire can grow and that the book can expand and reach the audience it really deserves to. And that takes more than just a launch month.
Thank you so much for that. That's brilliant. Really appreciate, your comment on that. Now, I can't have the author of the Ditching Imposter Syndrome without talking about how one can ditch the imposter syndrome. So, of course, we won't be able to summarize, the book in a few minutes, but what are the kind of key elements or key steps and key chapters that, comes to mind?
So the key is closing that gap. So either we need to shift how we see ourselves, or we need to clear out the stuff so that we can allow ourselves to become that version of ourselves. That's how you truly set yourself free from imposter syndrome. So the very first step is dealing with the inner critic, is knowing how to choose which thoughts to feed. And I teach strategies to help you to actually turn your inner critic and even your inner drama queen, which is like your inner critic on steroids, yeah? How to turn them into a genuine cheerleader using neuroscience, psychology, even going into more esoteric stuff like the energy work and the biology of our cells. So you're actually resetting your brain's neural pathways, the thought habits, and the filters in the brain for what we notice from the outside world to beat yourself up less. Then the layer below that, we look at the limiting beliefs, the fears, the blocks, and the excuses that we accidentally picked up, like the 15-year-old me with the throwaway comment on my English essay. And you get strategies not just to cope with them, but to really release them at the deepest levels. Then we move into the next stage, which is all about taking off the secret masks and armor, which imposter syndrome makes us put on, because it's an identity level issue. It's not about mindset. It's not about attitude. It's right there down at the bottom on what I call the imposter syndrome iceberg. Who am I? What if they find out I am not good enough? These are all identity level phrases. So once you've tamed the inner critic, you've dealt with those medium level blocks and fears, we get to the stuff at the bottom where you actually shift who you see yourself as being and who you allow yourself to become. Then the final stage in the process and in the book is I didn't want to just leave people feeling good. I wanted to say, so now what? So I actually wrap it up with, okay, who do I want to be? What do I want to stand for? What am I going to create? What is next on my journey? And often when we work on stuff like this, we do that at the beginning. It's right. Who do I want to be? What do I want to do? What are my goals and my objectives? When we do it there, we do it from the fear-based, constrained version of us, and we play small. When we do that at the end of the process, having cleared out the baggage, who you want to allow yourself to become is really different. What difference do I want to get to make? It expands. Yeah. So those are the key stages in the journey for ditching imposter syndrome, whether someone's reading the book, whether they're on my Stepping Up to Lead program, whether they're one of my Passionate World Changer members. That process works because by taming that self-talk first, it allows the rest of it to fall into place. By clearing out the beliefs and fears, it allows us to do the deeper identity work. By doing the deeper identity work, it allows us to step into becoming all of who we really are and making the difference we're really here to make in the world.
So why are we so good at being critical of ourselves and not so good at being our number one champion?
So I often describe imposter syndrome as being the secret fear of others judging us the way we're judging ourselves. Yeah. And the human brain is wired to spot threats. It's wired to keep us safe. So we pay more attention at a deeply unconscious level to the thoughts about what might go wrong and what might be dangerous. So we train ourselves and through evolution to spot what's going wrong. So negative self-talk is actually a natural way of being. And I'm not suggesting that we should overrule the bit of the brain that's saying, walking in front of moving cars isn't clever. Yeah. But we just conflate it. Okay. And then from a very young age as children, we're taught to compare ourselves to others. Yeah. We're taught to judge our work. We're given feedback by people who hadn't cleared out their stuff. Then there's a great Native American saying of all criticism is born of someone else's pain. So if you've got a teacher who's just had a bad day, she's going to give that essay a B and a contrived. Yeah. If she just had a good day, she might have given it a B and explained it in a more delicate way. And these little things teach us to compare ourselves, teach us to judge ourselves. And I do a lot of work, outreach work in schools to teach children how to choose which thoughts to feed, because it's kind of a really useful life skill. So we add to the evolutionary stuff, the environmental stuff, the experiential stuff that makes us judge ourselves, and we compare ourselves to others. Social media has made that so much worse, because we're not just seeing other people's highlight reels, we are seeing the algorithms curated decisions on the best bits of the best highlight reels, and we look at them and go, I can't compare with that, I'm not good enough. So this is the neuroscience reasons and the sociological reasons why we're so good at beating ourselves up.
Thank you very much. Was there anything in the survey that you did, in preparation for the book that surprised you or confirmed, what you knew intuitively?
Definitely. When I do talks on this, the thing that shocks people the most, and I miss being in a room with people because I love watching the faces when I say this one. I asked people, basically I asked them questions that allowed us to understand how big an issue imposter syndrome was for them. And of the female respondents, those who said they'd struggled with it daily or regularly in the past year alone, to the extent that it was affecting their work or business, was 52%. And that was high, but I also knew that figure was about right. So this is in the last year alone, and it's daily or regularly. For male respondents, the figure was, drumroll, 49%. Okay,
Right.
so most people think it's a female only problem, because I found that women are 20 times more likely to talk about this than men. And the original research study in 1978 from Clance and Eames was about female research students. It didn't actually involve men. So that myth that it's girls only came from all of that. And men handle it really differently. In a corporate environment, men tend to push it down, to push on through despite the fear, which led to men being 5 times more likely than women to turn to alcohol and drugs to cope. The women were more likely to hold back and wait till they felt ready to go for promotions, not take credit for their achievements, not go for those opportunities to shine. So this was the most surprising result for my audience. I knew it because I'd had so many male clients with this. But the fact that basically the rates are the same for men and women, but we now have data to evidence how they tend to handle it differently. So we can do different things to support men and women. And also it came up really clearly as 3 hidden drivers of the gender pay gap and the BAME pay gap and lack of equity in leadership roles.
That's smashing. Do you know, this conversation is amazing because it's 2 things. Obviously, our viewers and listeners get inspiration around their own journey as a book author or book crafter, if we want to use that term, but also the very practice of content marketing is full of people with self-doubt, full of people who are not sure. Also, because of actually what you just mentioned, the way in which sometimes content is distributed, they're not getting actually the positive feedback from their community, from their audience, and so on, to keep going. Because ultimately, for all of us as content creators, we need to know that what we're doing is kind of working for at least a handful of people to give us, that drive to continue.
Exactly. And imposter syndrome makes us tone down our message or change it to suit what somebody else has told us it should be, and not show up as all of who we really are. And people can kind of sense when we're holding back. And as you say, if we don't get that instant feedback, you put something out that you think is amazing and you get like 1 like 3 days later, it doesn't mean it wasn't amazing, but we take that really personally. And then we compare ourselves to others who've got massive engagement, but we don't know how or why. Are they in an engagement pod? Have they put loads of advertising behind that? Do they have an audience of people who are spending all day on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn and have nothing else to do? Imposter syndrome gets in the way of us really putting our message out there, as well as the obvious stuff like we don't take the PR opportunities, we discount without being asked. The 4 Ps of imposter syndrome: perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. They're all over it for content creation for us. And one thing I see so often with someone who's struggling with imposter syndrome is they'll create content for the sake of creating content, that classic busyness, rather than creating cornerstone pieces that will actually establish them as the expert in their field.
Well, do you know what? That's a perfect way to wrap up this conversation. But before I let you go, one last thing, if you don't mind, a bit of a
Yeah.
fun quiz, just to kind of, make sure that actually you can
I'm
start your
scared
your
now.
holiday, in good form. So, but seriously, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you,
really, really
Anna.
insightful and great, really inspiring conversation. I know that people will let you know about it. Actually, before the fun quiz,
Mm,
just building on what you've just said, I am surprised, even to this day, by the number of people who would tell me that they've read something that I've pulled together, that they've listened to the podcast
mhm,
or watched a video, although even though I've got no evidence that they've done
mm,
so,
mm,
they've not liked it, they've not commented it on it, they've not shared it, but that they've enjoyed the consumption. And I think we all
exactly.
need to kind of remember that what we see, or the barometer, would only reveal a fraction of what goes on out there. Let me start with the first question then for this fun quiz. It is fun for me anyway. If you were to have a Zoom call with a famous person, perhaps from the world of science, business, or entertainment, who would be your guest?
Gandhi. Gandhi,
Wow.
I want to know how he kept his cool. Yeah. I I have a friend and mentor whose father actually lived at the ashram with Gandhi. And before Gandhi went and did one of these enormous world-changing talks, he would clean the toilets at the venue because he wanted to show that the caste system wasn't relevant and that he was humble. But the other reason he did it is apparently he had the trots. He got so terrified before he spoke, every time he spoke, that he had to be in the bathroom until the last minute. And I would love to talk to him to explore that, because it shows how passionate he was about his message, that he was prepared to put himself through that level of fear and anxiety to still inspire millions and make a forever change in the world.
Smashing. Next question for you. If you could have your own online private concert, perhaps on Facebook Live, which band or artist would play for you and your family?
Muse.
Yeah.
Muse, the Origin of Symmetry album. It feels to me like a symphony. I love it so much. I still don't know what most of the words are that they're singing, but it's music that really moves me. It shifts my energy. It just clears out cobwebs.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, since you're having the enjoyment of an online concert, you got to have food to go with it. So, what food would you order for you and your family?
Okay, so if I'm being good, I love sort of raw living food, sprouted, fermented, that kind of thing. But if I'm going for real comfort, it would be a piece of the type of food I can never have again because my mum's passed on, but it would be my mum's macaroni cheese from when I was a kid.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Smashing. Next question for you. If you could have your own radio show, what would you talk about and who would be your co host?
Okay, I would talk about soul-led leadership and my co-host. I don't think I could stick to one. I think
Fair enough.
I would want a different co-host each week from somebody who has done something incredible. Somebody who has stepped up and given more. Like if we look at Gina Miller, for example, over the last few years with holding the government to account, people who've actually taken action at a level that put them at risk, that meant they've been trolled.
Hmm, excellent. Last question for you. What we are going through this moment in time around the globe will be behind us at some stage. We'll be able to move more freely and travel more freely. Where would you like to go with your family?
I am so desperate to go back to my favorite hotel in Turkey, which is in Sarıgerme in southwest Turkey. It is my haven. I show up there and I get hugs from the staff, and it's my battery recharge place on the beach, just looked after, all inclusive, but doesn't cost any more than a B&B in the UK. I miss them terribly. And I'm booked for next April. So if we have to be through the pandemic
Yeah, we
by then.
do. Wow. Fine choice. I'm big fan of Turkey. In fact, my very first job in marketing was for a Turkish tour operator in
You
London.
go. Yeah, I mean, politically, it's not the easiest country
I
right
know.
now, but that to me just feels like a little bit of heaven. Yeah. And I absolutely adore how welcomed we are. We've been studying a bit of Turkish, and it means we've made friends with so many of the staff. And for me, the battery recharge is so important when you're giving as an entrepreneur, when you're giving the whole time. I need a couple of times a year, ideally, where I get given back to.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me on the Content Marketing Studio. For our viewers and listeners who will have no doubt more questions and feedback to give you, where can they know and find out more about Clare Josa on the interweb?
Okay, so if you want just general Clare Josa stuff, it's clarejosa.com. If you're looking at writing a book, then it's my Passionate World Changers Club. I have an entire course in there called From Expert to Author that guides you step by step through the process.
That's smashing. Thank you very much. To you, viewers and listeners, thank you for your ongoing support. It is truly appreciated. Please leave comments, feedback, and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next time, go out there and make sure your content is better and faster. Bye for now.
Thank you.